Hi, welcome to OnAir live webinars from Google Cloud. We host these live webinar sessions every Tuesdays. Today, we are going to talk about GDPR and G Suite. My name is Edina Bakos, and I'm a Privacy Program Manager in Google Cloud. I'm based in Sunnyvale, California, and I work very closely with engineers on some of our data protection programs. You can ask questions anytime on the platform. We have Googlers standing by to answer them, and also we will have a Q&A at the end. So let's get started. So first, when I was asked to talk about the GDPR, I was thinking, oh man, I probably can talk about the GDPR for days, but I know we have limited time today, so I decided to focus on certain aspects of the GDPR, which is how it relates to Google Cloud, and specifically how we in G Suite can support our customers in GDPR compliance. So first of all, I just wanted to give a general high-level overview of the GDPR. What is the GDPR? The GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe. And this is by far the most significant data protection legislation that came out from Europe in the last 20 years. And the last one, of course, the European Data Protection Directive, 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, it was a very different era in terms of the internet. Internet was not as commonly used, and especially there was not so much personal data on it. What is some other big difference between the European Data Protection Directive from 20 years ago and the General Data Protection Regulation is that the directive is a directive, which means that it directed member states to pass their own privacy legislation. The result was similar laws, but somewhat of a patchwork, and that made compliance very challenging from customers and providers alike. And the GDPR intends to harmonize these laws, and it's also a regulation, which means that it has the direct effect of the law. So it's legally binding, and member states don't have to pass separate legislation. And of course, it means to be much more convenient for customers and providers alike. Probably the most important thing about the GDPR that it enhances data subject rights. It's building on existing data protection principles such as data minimization, storage limitation, purpose limitation. What does it mean? It means that when a company collects data for a specific purpose, it should be processed for only that purpose and only for a time period necessary. And of course, there are other data protection principles such as lawfulness, fairness, transparency, data accuracy, integrity, and so forth. We find all of these data protection principles in the GDPR, and the data subject rights build on these principles. For example, data integrity, accuracy, means that data subject rights have a right to request to rectify from companies to store the data from the companies about the data that they store about them. So right to rectification, right to access, right to restrict for data procession, and also data deletion. The GDPR also introduces two new rights. One is data portability, and the other is right to erasure. And I will talk about these data subject rights later. And as part of the enhanced data subject rights, the GDPR also further expands the international data transfer protection, which means that if data flows outside of the European Union, companies have to make sure that that data has the adequate level of data protection. And the GDPR also lists additional mechanisms compared to the previous one. For example, model contract clauses. Now we also have binding corporate rules and other certification mechanisms that companies can use. All right, so what are the 5 key things I wanted to talk about today in terms of the relation of GDPR and Google Cloud? Well, the first key difference is that now the GDPR also applies to cloud providers. It means that it's not only the customer, you, but us, Google Cloud, are also responsible for compliance. As second, I also wanted to talk about the subprocessor and what does it mean in terms of obligations for the GDPR, and we work for subprocessors to process customer data. I'm going to extend a little bit more about the extended data subject rights. I'm going to select 2 rights, and I'm going to demonstrate how we can support the customers when data subjects have requests to them regarding their data. And fourth, I want to talk about the incredible high fines that the GDPR introduced, which can be as high as 20 million euros or 4% of the annual turnover. And finally, I wanted to talk about GDPR and security. And I also wanted to showcase some of the security product features and configurations that we offer in G Suite that can be helpful with compliance. So number 1 is data processors. As I mentioned as first point, now the GDPR also applies to cloud providers, to us. So what does it mean? Maybe you have heard the terms data controller and data processors. The GDPR reintroduces these terms. They were already present in the European Data Protection Directive, but now the GDPR further clarifies and explains their meaning. Data controllers are you, the customers who are primarily responsible for data processing. What does it mean? That you are the one who determines the purposes and means of data processing based on the wording of the law. In other words, it means that the customer, the data controller, is the one who decides on the why and how on the data processing. And we, as data processors, are the one who process data only based on your instructions and on behalf of the controller. So let me tell you more about this and how we try to make our obligations as data processor. But first of all, people are very important. So we are really proud to say that we have the world's foremost experts in security, and they are responsible for information application and network security as well. They are the one who maintain our defense system, build our security infrastructure, decide on the security review process, also helping when we, with the review process when we onboard vendors, subprocessors, and they are also the one who build Google security infrastructure and responsible for implementing Google security policies. But we also have a very extensive team of compliance professionals and lawyers, including privacy lawyers. And our responsibility as a compliance professional is to ensure that Google as a whole, the company, are fully trained and aware about the latest data protection standards. As an example, we design Google's privacy training program. But we also have policy and compliance experts who directly engage with the regulators the regulators in Europe who are responsible for imposing those really high fines. And whenever we developing features for compliance, we check with them to make sure that we are going in the right direction and it can be helpful with our customers' compliance needs. So it's fair to say that we are really committed helping customers in their GDPR compliance. And we're not only saying this, but we put our commitments to writing. As an example, we updated our data processing agreements with new terms that reflect the changes within the GDPR. And here I wanted to remind you that in case you haven't done so, please opt into the most recent amendments, data processing amendments. And I will show you in 2 slides later how you can do that if you haven't done so by tuning into our GDPR Resource Center. We also state in our data processing agreement how we, as data processor, only process data based on your instructions. Also, our employees are required to sign in confidentiality agreements, and they have to go through mandatory privacy trainings. This is what we, the privacy professional, designs and also make sure that every single person in the company goes through them. Our employees also have to go through code of conduct training, and that training explains the best practices and expected behavior for data protection. So what do we do specifically beside the contracts when we assist the data controllers, you, the customers, in GDPR compliance? As I mentioned, data subject rights are incredibly important under the GDPR. And under the GDPR, you have to prepare for a data subject request. They will ask to access, rectify, and restrict their data processing. And we do have built-in functionality in products where these requests can be easily met. We also have a dedicated team who can respond in case you have any data protection related inquiry. We had terms around incident notification for several years, so it's nothing new to us, and we continue to promptly notify you when we become aware of an incident. And this is very important under the GDPR because the GDPR has really strict incident notification timelines. For data controller, for the customer, it's 72 hours after you became aware of an incident. And within these 72 hours, you have to notify the supervisory authorities. Us data processors, on the other hand, we have to notify you, the controller, without undue delay. And again, you can find all these terms in our data processing amendments. And as I mentioned, I really want to call your attention to our GDPR Resource Center, which you can very easily find by Googling GDPR, Google, and Resource Center. And on the top banner, as I'm showing on the slide, you can see where you can click and opt into the new terms. And please do so to make sure that you have an agreement which reflects the GDPR changes. On this website, you can also find more details about the things I described today, including some of the product features I will describe at the end. So number 2, use of subprocessors. Today's business environment is a little more complex as having just one data controller and one data processor. And we, Google as well, we in cases rely on third-party vendors processing customer data. And it's very important that these vendors, third-party vendors, go through very, very rigorous security and selection process. And even the onboarding process is very rigorous. For example, they have to go through strict security testing. We are also transparent about the subprocessor we use. You can find them on our website, and also there is a link in the data processing agreement where you can review the list of them. Data subject rights as a third point again, and I decided to use two specific data subject rights to demonstrate how we in G Suite can support in case customers come to you with data subject requests. The first one is data return. So I mentioned at the beginning that there are new data subject rights under the GDPR, and one of them is data portability, right to data portability. What does it mean? Data subjects did have the right to access their data even before the GDPR, but the GDPR takes it even further. It requires that data controllers has to make this data available to customers in a machine-readable, structured, and commonly used format. They should be able to export it and transmit to another controller if they wish, without any further hindrance from the controller. Now, Google had that a feature even before the GDPR that made it available both for customers to retrieve their data, export it, and take it to somewhere. It's called the Google Takeout. And also in G Suite, the administrator were able to export customer data via the functionality of G Suite. But for GDPR, we took it even further, and we recently, before the GDPR, launched an enhanced data export feature that enables you to download data for all of your domain. And we made sure that you can do it securely, so we added additional security controls in there. As an example, only super admins who have been with the company for 30 days can do that. They have to use additional authentication, multi-factor authentication. Whenever there's multiple super admins, we promptly notify them if such export was initiated. And also, you can only do this if you have less than 1,000 employees. Otherwise, you have to go through the Google support team, and they can temporarily enable the feature, again, to make sure that the data export happens securely. The next one is data deletion. Data deletion is not a new right in GDPR, but it is still very important because we want to make sure that we only store data until it's necessary for business purpose. So we always had built-in functionality in G Suite and all of its products that made it possible for you to delete customer data anytime. And we also, as we mentioned also in our data processing amendment and also in a recent public statement, we make sure that relevant customer data, in case we receive a deletion request from you, will be deleted from our system within 180 days. Unless, of course, there are some retention obligations that apply, and this can be a EU member state law requirement, or a litigation hold, or tax authorities sometimes also want us to retain data longer, as an example. And now the fines. So probably when you heard first about the GDPR in the news, you read about the incredible fines. The fines are under the GDPR are incredibly high. No other data protection legislation could impose such incredible fines as the GDPR. And whenever you need attention from our executives at your company, I recommend you to bring up the fines. That always gets their attention. And the fine, of course, can be as maximum fine 20 million euros or 4% of the annual turnover. The GDPR gives example what are the scenarios and what are the type of infringements these maximum fines can be imposed. And these are related to the data protection principles I mentioned at the beginning, data subject rights, or the international data transfer mechanisms. And the GDPR also gives a detailed list of what are the deciding factors the data protection authorities that can impose these fines look into. And things that can be relevant, the type of data that was in scope for the infringement. These are sensitive personal data, for example. It also a lot depends on your behavior. Was the infringement the result of a negligent or an intentional behavior? Did you have any similar relevant previous infringements? How much did you do to mitigate the damage that resulted from the infringement? How much did you cooperate with the data protection authorities? So these are all deciding factors, and there is more in the GDPR in Article 83. And finally, as fifth point, I wanted to talk about the GDPR and security. Because GDPR is a data protection law, so it has privacy and security provisions as well. Such as other things, the GDPR has provisions and describes responsibilities both for the data controller and the data processor. So you and the customer and us are both responsible. And security is really at the core of the GDPR. The GDPR doesn't give you an exhaustive list of product features that you must have in order to be GDPR compliance, and it would be very difficult because of the changing technology, but it does describe that both the controller and the processor have to perform a risk assessment based on the recent state-of-the-art industry accepted best practices in security. And actually the GDPR does bring up two examples, pseudonymization and encryptions as some of these best examples, but really the point is that you have to be able to protect your user data from unlawful access, unauthorized access, and unlawful processing. So what are some of these examples we have in G Suite that you can leverage in GDPR compliance? I want to talk about these features in the context of access monitoring and access control, because these are very important for your security best practices. So, and again, I've highlighted encryption here because the GDPR does highlight encryption as one of the example of security best practices. The first one is two-step verification. Why do companies need two-step verification? Well, we know that passwords can be easily compromised. They can be figured out, they can be stolen. So it's very important that especially in terms of enterprise corporate data, which is more vulnerable in terms of security vulnerability. The two-step verification gives you an additional layer when it asks user when they sign in for additional proof of identification. And one good example is a security key, a physical security key that you can plug into your laptop, monitor, or desktop. So this is definitely highly recommended. We use this, all of employees of Google are required to use it as a security best practice. Suspicious login monitoring. So suspicious login monitoring uses Google's robust machine learning capabilities to detect suspicious logins. And in order to use this, administrators can sign up for email alerts. And we look at possibly suspicious behavior. Examples, for example, if someone tries to log into your corporate account from an unusual location or from a new unknown device. First, the process is, in most cases, we send a login challenge to the user, and we typically ask them, we send them a passcode that they have to enter. We send them a passcode in emails or either cell phone, whichever was their selected method. And if they're unable to solve this challenge or avoid it, then this is when we send a notification, a very clear notification to the administrator so that it can take an action, or he can take an action. Mobile management, mobile device management, MDM. So we recently launched a feature that we announced that next terms of MDM, mobile device management, as part of our Cloud Identity SSO catalog. And this is great because now basic MDM comes by default on with corporate mobile devices. And that means that employees don't have to download additional profiles in order to use this, but it comes by default on both on Android and iOS devices. It helps the administrator because it gives a single dashboard view where the administrator can see all the devices that can access corporate data. It makes it very easy to enforce passcodes or remove content or wipe devices remotely in case they get compromised. And again, the great thing about this is that no user intervention needed. And this is very helpful in today's world, especially when corporations have to deal with BYOD devices, for example. This solution works really well. And of course, as I mentioned, it comes with the basic MDM feature by default on, but you can always select more advanced settings. Data loss prevention, or DLP. DLP uses optical character recognition, or OCR technologies, to scan contents in Gmail, including its attachments, files in Drive and Team drives. And it's looking for possibly sensitive content. We privacy professionals are aware of what can be potentially sensitive data, both globally and country specifically. As an example, we know that credit card information and bank account information is sensitive. So we have these by default turned on, and you can very easily turn these predefined detectors on and off depending on which countries you operate on, for example. You also define your own custom rules because you are the one who know your business. You are the one who know that what's sensitive data for you in terms of intellectual property and sensitive project codes, and you can define these rules by keywords or using regular expressions. And if you observe that you receive too many false positives, you can always adjust these content thresholds. Information rights management is the next good example. We do have it available both for admins within the admin console and users. And what it means is that the admins can limit file access privileges. For example, you may want to restrict certain sensitive files to make sure that they can only be shared within the domain. And it gives you very granular controls. You can define different rules for teams, for example. That the sales team, as an example, are not allowed to share certain type of files with an external domain. And it also adds IAM controls, additional information rights management controls, both for the admin and the user. And here I'm showing how it looks from the user perspective. So first of all, by default, it's only shared by the user who created, and they have to take additional actions, additional clicks if they want to share it with others. And also, again, both administrators and user can very easily, by checking checkboxes, can disable downloading, printing, and copying files. And finally, I wanted to talk about enhanced email security. Gmail now offers SMIME, and SMIME stands for Secure Multi-Purpose Internet Mail Extension, and this is why we prefer to call it SMIME. And really, secure is an important word here. So this is now the industry standard way of encrypting emails, and it requires emails to be signed and encrypted when we send them, when they send it out. And it's also important that you can bring your own certificates and use that with SMIME. But Gmail has additional security features, such as TLS and DKIM warnings. And I show an example here that we try to give very, very clear visual signals in case we suspect that a user receives a message from an unauthenticated source. And also, we try to give very clear visual signals if we see that a message was unencrypted. So this was the last security feature I wanted to talk about today, but of course there are more. And you find some of these features both for G Suite and GCP at our GDPR Resource Center. So please stay tuned for Q&A. We will be back in less than a minute. Hi, welcome back. We received some questions that I would like to answer. The first question is an interesting one. Does the GDPR require data to be stored in the EU? Data localization. So one great thing about the GDPR that it does not require data localization. It does enhances the data transfer mechanism, so it does require that there is an adequate level of data protection from data that's flowing outside of the EU. And the GDPR lists certain mechanism how this can be achieved or recognized by the DPAs, and some of these are the privacy shield, for example, model contract clauses that Google uses, and GDPR mentions other mechanisms as well, for example, binding corporate rules, and you can have certification as well. But this is very important. So yes, the EU, for the European Union, is actually its aim to make sure that the data flows freely within the EU. So there are no data localization requirements. The second question is, will all these security features be used only for EU citizens? I got this question before. It's a very good question, and as someone who worked on these privacy programs, we really do not differentiate between EU citizens and other citizens when we have been preparing for the GDPR. So we make these features available to everyone because we believe the GDPR has great data protection practices. We believe that data subject rights are important. We agree with all the data protection principles, so we really want to make sure that the good things that came with GDPR are available for everyone. The third question is about the GDPR Resource Center, and I have been talking about the Resource Center a lot. And so again, it's very easy to find just by Googling GDPR, Google, and Resource Center, but we will provide a link in the platform on the Q&A session. Someone was asking how can they find out more about DLP if we have white paper, help center articles, and those are good examples. Again, and if I remember correctly, you can actually find these again just to go to the GDPR Resource Center, and when we talk about product features that can be helpful with the GDPR, they are linked there. But again, you can also just Google DLP or data loss prevention white paper, and both the actual white paper and other help center articles will pop up. And same goes for GCP. You can learn about DLP API for GCP as well. Okay, so the last question is there a continuity between GDPR compliance in G Suite and GCP? What are the counterparts in the larger cloud offering? Which features you presented are also available in GCP? It's a great question. Yes, there is a continuity between GDPR compliance within G Suite and GCP. I am in G Suite, but we work very closely with the GCP teams, and they have similar features, not exactly the same because the product offering is different, but they also have, as an example, two-step verification for DLP, data loss prevention. They have DLP APIs. They also offer various products for access monitoring and control. Some of them are product specific. For example, they have stack driver monitoring and logging, cloud security scanners. I believe in App Engine, and also Security Command Center. So I actually didn't go through all these security features because there are many, but we have Google Security Center and Google Command Center for G Suite and GCP, which is very helpful for the administrators because it can gives them an overall view of the G Suite products security positioning. Those are very helpful. And in case I don't remember all of them, again, these product features and more are available in the GDPR Resource Center. So I believe, I don't know if we have more questions, but no? So we don't have more questions. So again, I wanted to tell you that we do these live webinars every Tuesday. You can check it on the Cloud OnAir website. And we have a next session coming up. And stay tuned for this. This is CE Chat Observability with Open Census. And thank you so much for joining in today.